delighted to be having this conversation with you, Ambassador Kornbluh. Thank you so much for being with us. And we were just saying, sort of the Nerd Fest continues. We're going to move on from the open source foundation model value chain and the work that we talked about this morning around all of the intricacies of interoperability to talk about another area that is absolutely top of mind for policymakers, for civil society, and for industry, and that is labor and the impact of AI on people, on workers. It's interesting because, I'll just say this quickly, it's interesting because we talked a lot this morning about how we just fall into these binary choices, right? Or also these narratives of absolute inevitability. And I really do think that in the future of work, that is where we have done this so much as a community, sort of, the robots are coming, they're taking our jobs, we're going to write poetry and need UBI, right? So this very, very high level narrative about that we have no choice and we actually can't, as Alan Davidson said, really, really determine what the future is and hold ourselves accountable to that future as well. So it's a great opportunity to be with you to sort of unpack this a little bit and get into where we think some of those areas are, particularly because you bring this deep expertise in your leadership role at the diplomatic level around thinking through the digital economy and how the digital economy shapes workers' experiences, both equality and improvements. We think about skills and reskilling and talent and workforce and all those sorts of things as well. So thank you so much for helping us to dig into this one in particular. So that's really where I wanted to start. Based on your experience in this area, how do you frame the question of the role of AI and its impact on labor? When you're thinking about the dimensions, both in terms of potential to drive inequality, but also to promote innovation, to promote better quality of life, how do you frame out that question when you think about how we should be considering this?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. And it's I think this kind of venue and this kind of Nerd Fest is really important if we're going to get away from the abstractions and if we're going to exercise our choices as humans. We really need to get into the details. And we need to have conversations like this and unpack things. And so I think this is just, essential. And some of the work that you all have done in terms of your reports and guidelines and so on, I think are so, so important. So, I think there's, this sounds so trite. There are opportunities and there are risks. And I think so much, we've promised workers in the past so often, this new technology will come or trade will come and don't worry, we'll retrain you. You'll be retrained. You may not have this job in the factory, but you'll get this other job, or your kids will get a great job. And the training hasn't come. And as you said, it's been this sort of inevitable process. And I think there's been a real re-examination of that paradigm and a real sense that what happens in the workplace is incredibly important. That worker representation is incredibly important, that worker input is incredibly important, and that it's important starting with the design, through the deployment, through the use, through the evaluation and the testing, and then also how the technology is used on them. I mean, we now have worker surveillance in so many places. They're being hired using AI, surveilled, measured, and so on. And so one of the things, you guys, there's no reason anyone would know, I'm brand new back into the government. I'd been in the government ages ago and I'm back in now. And one of the things I was really excited about in joining the administration is that there has been this digging in below the abstraction level. Yes. So you hear about this AI executive order, it's the longest executive order in history, and you think, well, what is that? Is it a bunch of reports? But the actual agency is involved in modernizing existing law for the new technology have really been rolling up their sleeves and looking at some of these issues.
I couldn't agree more, and I think so. Let's dig into that a
Yeah.
little bit, because it was the most comprehensive executive order in history, as we've heard. We were very heartened to see that there was a clear piece of work carved out for the Department of Labor to think through, and the Economic Council of Advisors to really think through what do we need to know about the impact on the broader workforce, and what are the considerations that both employers and labor organizations need to be taking into account when they're thinking about AI. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you think about that.
Yeah, you can see I have my cleared talking points. Trying to put them in, actually answer the question.
There's a few scribbles on the talking points, so yeah.
There's a Council of Economic Advisors has done some work. They have laid out some of the opportunities and risks. And then also the Department of Labor issued, I just wanted to see what it was called, Principles on AI and Worker Well-Being. And that is targeted at developers and employers, and again, talks about centering worker empowerment, making sure that workers are involved at every step of the way, including oversight. And then the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has also put out, what do they call those? Resources for workers. And this gets at, like, where might you see discrimination? So again, there's existing law on discrimination that the EEOC is charged with enforcing, but as the technology changes and as the use of technology changes, it may appear in different ways. So they put out guidance, and it includes things like surveillance, that's where you might see discrimination, including discrimination, all kinds of protected classes, including disability, pregnancy, and so on. So I think that's been really important work. And I should say, like, we shouldn't take it for granted, these agencies exist. Of course, they're going to update their enforcement and their guidelines and so on for a new technology. That has not always happened in the past. We've sort of reified these technologies, and we've thought of them, as you were saying, we've thought of them as sort of inevitable, happening, and didn't really think about the intersection between existing law and these new challenges. And I think the fact that these agencies, which often don't have tech talent in them, they've had to be, we've done the big tech talent surge. 200 new people have been hired into the government. But then a lot of the traditional folks who have been there for a long time and are used to doing things the way they're doing have had to reevaluate, re-up. And I should say another piece that's happening right now that I'm going to be lucky enough to be involved in is how the agencies themselves are buying and using AI, and how they're involving workers. And so that's, I think, going to be a real learning experience.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we heard also that's an important policy lever, is that through the procurement process, governments can put conditions into those contracts and into those agreements, and there could be specific worker protections in there as well.
Right, and the government is a huge purchaser, has a big footprint, so it can influence the marketplace, but it also sets examples. It sets an example by how it does things, so that's really important.
Well, we were very happy to see the Department of Labor's ethical principles around worker well-being. We were very happy because we felt that they were very similar to some of the work that we had done in our guidelines for AI and shared prosperity as well, and really trying to articulate very clearly what the econometrics are that firms need to be thinking about and that policy leaders need to be aware of, and that labor organizations need to have in their back pockets when they're in negotiations, to think through what are those trade-offs, what are both the risks and opportunities as we think about this real dynamic between replacement and augmentation, which gets a lot of airtime, but I think really we need to get underneath and understand more directly as well. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you see as the role of labor in these, really setting the agenda with regard to where we go next with AI and workers.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just say as well about getting into the nuts and bolts is that there's this another problem with the way we think about government and technology is in the general discourse in public, I know none of you would think this way, that there's a dichotomy, a trade-off between regulation, safeguards, and innovation. And I think, as you said, like stating out, this is the kind of work you need to do to make sure you're not discriminating. This is the kind of work you should do. This is who you should consult. We're providing certainty.
Right.
And that certainty makes it easier to innovate. Especially now when we're not doing it after the industry has grown up with all kinds of expectations, but doing it at the beginning. And I think that's incredibly important. And we should never, I think, buy into this idea that one squishes the other. Sometimes that certainty is exactly what's needed. But so worker representation, unions, I mean, this is not in my clear points, but incredibly important for a couple of reasons, I would say. One is, just you need, if you're going to speak up, often you're not going to speak up directly, you're going to speak up through your representative. So that's incredibly important, and that's put into the Department of Labor rules. But also, there's a capacity building issue. There's individual workers aren't really going to know enough. They're not going to have the background, know the technical issues, know the legal issues. And so I think just that education and capacity building is going to be incredibly important. And that means that unions are going to have, and they already are, but they really need to be growing and learning in this area along with the rest of us. And I think that means that a lot of us have a responsibility to work with them, to bring them along. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And we're hearing some of the same things, both this question of, in terms of better understanding of rights and protections, but also, we did some work. And I should say that one of the reasons that we're chatting is that Stephanie Bell at PAI, who leads this work and is our expert in this space, could unfortunately not be with us today, but she did some great work on job quality and really trying to understand through workers' perspectives what are both the benefits and the risks of the technology. And I think it's that nuanced understanding that will also help both labor and employers to understand how to make those choices more effectively as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the job quality. It's a hard thing to talk about without sounding like you're promising a pig in a poke, that, your job will get better, you won't lose your job. But these are choices we can make. And there is a way that these can take some of the rote tasks away from all of us. I hope it will for me, and not displace people or create new jobs. But those are choices we have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're in, UNGA Week. Summit of the Future is happening. The General Assembly is meeting. We have the conversations that we'll be taking this week internationally. We know that France has identified that the future of work is going to be one of their key themes with regard to their AI Action Summit. So how do you see the work that you're doing directly in the United States? What are the implications for broader relationships and coordination internationally?
Yeah, I think it's so important, the work that's being done at the UN in terms of getting consensus on how we think about these things, what the principles are, what the terminology is, what the definitions are. So I think that's incredibly important. And I would just say that there are three other things that we can look at. One is a global research agenda, and there'll be some talk about that from the United States. But how do we make sure that's inclusive? That we can do the research not just in the most developed, richest countries, and then everybody else, buys the products, but that the research agenda is, and the research, the tools that you need to do the research, the compute, the data, et cetera, are widely available to researchers and also to entrepreneurs. And then a second piece of that is, of course, deployment. How can folks living around the world get access to the technology, get access to, it's incredibly expensive in order to start their new businesses, in order to benefit in education. And then the third thing I'd say is this word capacity building. Countries are going to need, if they're going to build out a robust governance system, if they're going to think about worker training, worker empowerment, there may just be a real need for building up their own government's capacity, and so organizations like the OECD and the UN and NGOs can help with that an awful lot. That's really important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have time for a few questions.
Oh, good.
Do we? Okay, great. Questions on this?
I see one of my colleagues from the Department of Labor there. She can tell me if I got everything right.
Thank you so much. I'm formerly with the Department of Labor, no longer.
Oh, so you
there.
can tell me.
No, wonderful. I am curious to come back to Rebecca's point about procurement, about what you see as the willingness of the political willingness to use the procurement power to really push companies to think seriously about workers' interests. And your comments earlier, I appreciate about kind of our history of not doing so well on retraining workers when there's been displacement through trade or through other changes in the economy. I think it's pretty clear that we don't have a very good track record or infrastructure for doing that kind of retraining. And we know that when people lose jobs mid-career, they tend to stay unemployed for longer periods of time. They get reemployed at lower wages and with less benefits and job security and so forth, all of which kind of contributes to, I think, an understanding of what the precarity is of workers when there's a large technological change. So in light of that, I'm curious just to get your sense of whether you think there's real opportunity politically to use procurement to write in expectations or obligations for employers to do more to keep workers attached to their current workers rather than allowing displacement to happen at a large scale.
I love a conference where the word precarity is used with my people. Yes, so one of my many titles is I'm the Vice Chair of the Chief AI Officers Council, which I'm very proud of. And I think there's a lot of.
Tell us what that is.
So part of the executive order is that all the agencies had to hire chief AI officers, and often these chief AI officers, have other duties. They might be the chief procurement officer, or, and of course, just like with all the companies, there's this, who does privacy, who does diversity, who does, AI, and they're working all that out. And they have a bunch of obligations under the executive order. And I think, so in addition to procurement, where instruction is going to come down from the Office of Management and Budget to all the agencies about good guidelines for procurement, there's also work with these AI officers and with that as the actual stuff is happening in the agencies. And I think that's going to be really important to do right. Both because, as we were saying, the government has such a big footprint in terms of being a purchaser and being in the market, but also as an example setting. And how do you do this consultation with the public, consultation with your own workers, consultation with worker representation? That's going to be really important. But I think the procurement is a big deal. And be really, there are a lot of issues to be solved there. So we'll see how that gets implemented. But I'm looking forward to, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to working on. Yeah.
Two questions. One, you mentioned research questions. I'm wondering what you think those are that we don't already have the answers to, or what tools we need to answer them. And then second, on trade, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the NAFTA years, and I think it would be nice for us to apply those here, but obviously digital jobs are a different beast, and given that it is so easy for companies to move digital jobs around and that the workers are so alienated from each other and from their employers, how do you think that changes how we think about using trade agreements as a lever for labor protections around the world?
Trade agreements as a lever for, say that last part again, for labor participation?
Labor protections in the AI supply chain around the world.
Well, I'll take the first one first and try to figure out what I think about the second one. So what I meant by research is, so one of the things that, for instance, has happened already is there's a national AI research resource which companies have given a lot of in-kind and in some cases financial contributions, and then that compute, data, et cetera, can be shared with researchers in various places and entrepreneurs to play with AI, to learn about AI, to see what kinds of applications can be developed, to learn more about the models. And I was just out at Stanford talking to the folks at their big AI center, human-centered AI, and they feel like even the largest universities, the wealthiest universities like Stanford, just don't have the funds to really research the models at scale, because it's so expensive, and they can't train people easily if they don't have access to those models. So if that's happening, at Stanford, like you can imagine at smaller universities, other kinds of researchers. So the idea of this National AI Research Resource is to make those resources available to researchers all around the country, and hopefully to work on some of these public benefits that we're promised from AI. We're promised it's going to help with drug development. Well, we need to figure out how to do that with better education, with better labor training. You need to have researchers working on things, and they need to get access. So that's what I was talking about. And there's a bill in Congress, the Create AI Act, which has passed the Senate, which would provide additional funding on top of this pilot that's going on now. You know what? I think I'm so new in my job that I better not talk about trade. I do as an observer. I don't think we're doing a lot of new trade agreements right now. It seems like the talk that's going on now internationally is a lot of nitty-gritty focus on standards, focus on export controls. There's a lot of international climate work that's going on, but I don't see a lot of right now those trade agreements. I mean, I'm saying this as an observer, not as somebody in the government. I don't see a lot of new movement towards let's reduce tariffs, let's get rid of, certainly nobody's talking about let's get rid of any labor protections. So, so I think that's, I think those are, but I think international standards that raise the floor is a new way people are thinking about things. I think before there was this assumption, again, like we were saying before, that that if you trade, everybody will be richer, and the research just shows that that's not true, and that we have to think in terms of these structural issues like labor empowerment.
We do have time for, no more questions.
Oh, that's it.
No more time?
Yeah, we're done.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
that was quick.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.